What's up, guys? This is Cory coming at you from the exotic location known as my backyard. So, took you to Breck recently, took you to North Captiva recently, but luckily I'm back home just trying to chill for a little bit. So, today we're going to talk about all the shenanigans in the AV world happening in the background that most people don't see. And a lot of this stuff it goes across multiple industries, to be honest. A lot of you people, even if you know absolutely nothing about AV, you'll know more about this. So please feel free to explain everything in the background. Had a couple of customers recently that seem to be absolutely oblivious to all this, I hate not having the best face forward in terms of customer service. I mean, it irks me to no end when I can't provide a perfect experience, but some of this stuff is just beyond my control, and I can't help that people get mad every now and then, but it just got me to thinking, maybe I should just explain just how messed up things are right now. So anyways, going back to the very first, I mean, this has been going on for almost a year and a half now. So, at first, us internet guys didn't really see much going on. The biggest thing that we saw at first was, of course, the quarantine. And if there wasn't any local orders, then, the customers made up their own rules. I mean, basically, most audio dealers are actually installers. I'm not, just because this particular area doesn't have a heck of a lot of disposable income. So to be honest, I would starve if I had to install everything. But that's the reality for most dealers. And the biggest thing I saw was that they couldn't get into people's houses. So I had friends that they've got stuff in stock. They've got wires, they've got speakers, they've got whatever. At the time period, TVs were still able to be gotten. But the problem is that the customer just didn't want them in the house. So, sometimes there was local rules that actually prevented them, even if it was a willing participant. But that was the biggest thing I saw. I mean, this was like back last March, April, possibly May. I mean, guys were just sitting there. They were, ready to go. Their hands were tied. So us internet guys, I guess at the time period, we were thinking we were real smart and, sucks to be you type of thing, but it's turned to 180. We're affected now. So the second biggest thing, or second thing I saw at least, was credit problems started to come up. So first of all, credit card companies, I guess they started noticing a bunch of fraudulent charges, people running up the bills, not paying them, things like that. But at some point, they started to get real skeptical about small business owners. So the reality is that most small AV companies, they basically have one credit card, and they eat on it, and they grocery shop on it, and they, buy AV gear with it and everything else. So at some point, the credit card companies said, we're not going to give any more increases except in, extreme circumstances, which I think hurt some guys because of reasons we'll get into shortly. If you're not stockpiling, you're just dead in the water. And, we have to stockpile in this environment. And when you're used to just a non-inventory, when you're used to half a dozen distributors having what you need and potentially being there within a day or two, and you're, turning on your head and you got this situation going on, that could put a damper on it. The other thing is that, business credit in general, even mortgages, we ended up getting a mortgage on the shop, and, as a small business owner, just at the time, I don't know if things have changed now, but we had somewhat of a hard time. Not that we weren't qualified, but they just, you know, they started clamping down. You know, you got to have 2 years worth of taxes, which is a given, but then they started, you know, you have to have a financial statement, which is basically doing your taxes all over again, even if it's only for 3 or 4 months. So we actually had to do 2 or 3 of those and answer a bunch of other questions. Banks started getting real skeptical just out of the blue. I'm assuming that hurt other dealers. Like I said, we were plenty qualified, so I don't know. I could see that hurting some guys. So the biggest thing that became an issue real quick is worker problems, and there's kind of a 1-2 punch with that. First of all, you know, the government started getting really relaxed with all the stimulus money, all of the unemployment, and it became real apparent real quick that a lot of people decided they just don't want to work anymore, and which is unfortunate. On the one hand, I understand, because it's like, why work when I can sit at home and make almost the same amount, which we shouldn't have ever promoted that situation in the first place, you know, especially on our dime. Where do you think that money's coming from? I mean, we don't have it. We're just printing this stuff out of thin air. I mean, it's the definition of fiat money. It's just, you know, we're just printing it, and we're seeing inflation, you know, hit us hard because of some of this, in my opinion. But the other part of that is that, you know, a lot of people just got sick. So, you know, plus people, even if they did want to work and they weren't sick, they ended up getting furloughed. So that's actually, you know, 3 different things that happened pretty much all at the same time. And that really affected shipping companies, that affected you know, warehouses, that affected the docks. We'll get to the docks here in a little bit, but you know, when there's no workers at the docks to unload stuff from China, I mean, what do you expect is going to happen after several months? It's just absolute chaos at this point. The biggest thing that we saw at first, because of the worker issues, was shipping companies. So all their logistics just got crazy, absolutely crazy. Just weird routes showing up at different times of the day, delays up to 4 days. There was truck shortages and worker shortages, and we would ship stuff to somebody, and you know, a pallet would arrive 20 minutes from their house, and it would literally just sit there for 4 days because there were, you know, people were either sick or whatever. It's just super aggravating. That was really the first time that I was like, oh, holy crap, this is just going to get worse, you know. The other thing that we saw due to the worker shortage and worker problems, and I guess not wanting to work and furloughs and everything else, was tech support, which personally, my personal opinion, I absolutely don't understand this. So we knew good and well, especially from an AV perspective, that basically sales was going through the roof, especially internet sales. You know, you got all these people sitting around quarantined at home. You know, what do you think's going to happen? Well, they're going to start looking for reasons to upgrade their systems, what they're going to start doing. So, you know, this was surprisingly, and you know, I'm not trying to brag or anything, it's just reality. You know, we were just order after order, just making money like crazy. I mean, that was pretty much par for the course. Everybody was like this. So we knew good and well that you know, demand was going through the roof. Stuff was going out into the hands of newbies. And you know what happens? Tech support guys get laid off. So that makes absolutely no sense to me. Everybody should have. This isn't just one company either. You know, if this sounds familiar, I'm sorry, but it's just it put us in a pinch. It got people mad at us that we had no control over. it is super aggravating, and everybody should have had the foresight to realize that when sales are going through the roof, last thing you should do is cut your tech support army in half. So I think there was multiple issues with that. First of all, call centers, at this point, there's starting to look like a thing of the past. By this day and age, I'm surprised it took a worldwide pandemic to realize that a bunch of people in cubicle farms isn't the most mentally healthy thing ever. I spent 20 years in that situation. It's not fun. So and the biggest problem is that I got sick 2-3 times a year in the wintertime. Basically, you could just feel it happening, one person would come in with a sniffling nose and it would just not go away, and next thing you know, 2-3 people's got it, and next thing you know, it's like half the cubicle farm is sniffling and coughing and who knows what the hell, and it's like, I'm gonna get sick sooner or later. This sucks. It's coming, and there's nothing you can do about it. But at least with worldwide pandemic, people, I guess, finally snapped out of it and started letting people, go home. But it took a while for that to switch over, and it took a while for people to realize, hey, maybe we should, have not laid off our tech support guys. So tickets and calls and emails just started to pile up like crazy. I mean, they tend, the industry as a whole tends to respond to dealers a little faster than customers. But yeah, if you were a customer, I mean, this is multiple companies, so don't get mad at me. It's just how it is. We were seeing stuff where people would send something in and absolutely no response, like 6-8 weeks later, which is absolutely unacceptable in my opinion. And it took a while for people to realize, hey, we should make this a priority. But in the meantime, it just got absolutely messy, which I guess irked me a little bit, because we were having to work overtime and deal with these people, and basically all of that load got put on us, which at least we try. Some of these chuckleheads out there, I won't mention any names, but a lot of your big internet dealers that sell other unnamed equipment that has nothing to do with AV, or your big box stores, or just the guys who are shady. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of shady dealers out there. A lot of them would just be like, look, not my problem. Here's the number. Or they wouldn't even tell you the number. They would just be like, call these guys, ask for second level if possible. And that was the end of it. And people were absolutely lost. So, even we were having to support sales that other dealers made that manufacturers wouldn't respond to. And what do you do in that situation? Because everything that I do is so public. If you piss somebody off or multiple people off, and there's nothing stopping them from just bad mouthing you all over half the internet. It's a bad situation. So, and I didn't really like being put in that situation, but that's reality. We did what we could. We helped as many people as we could. It got old, it got tiresome, but we got through it for the most part. Now, the interesting thing about the tech support is during this transition period, we started noticing things that was a little bit different. As people started working from home and getting more accustomed to it, and this isn't just AV, this is anywhere. You could call your credit card company and see this situation. I mean, you'd start to hear, dogs bark in the background. And the weird thing is, here's what's weird to me, is that some of these companies actually have software that makes it sound like you're in a call center. I guess it feels more professional to some people, but there's some of that noise you hear in the background is actually totally fake. So, and you can actually hear both at the same time. It's like fake call center stuff and then you could hear a baby crying and dogs barking. It's so awkward. I don't know why. Just knock it off with the fake call center stuff. You're not impressing anybody, in my opinion. So it's just distracting. But it was a little humorous, but it was weird more than anything. The other thing we saw was weird local rules. So basically, this is one example, San Francisco. You know, if you're a company out in San Francisco, you can have willing and able workers who are not sick, who want to come in to work, and there's no mass quarantine rule in place, but there started to show up weird rules, like you could only come into work no more than 2 days a week. So, well, when you're shipping stuff out as a company, that may be a problem, because, you know, what we started seeing is these companies would be like, you know, they would take orders, but they would just have to sit on them for several days. And then on the one day that they could come into work, it was just mass panic. I mean, people were shipping stuff as hard as they could. You know, the response to queries over the phone or email was pretty much non-existent. So I'm not entirely sure what that accomplished, but in hindsight, I guess it seemed smart at the time. But yeah, a couple of those situations was super awkward. Up until all of this, I guess the biggest concern in everybody's mind was just money. I mean, and this is kind of the world as a whole. You can even look back on Grant Cardone's timeline on Facebook, and you could see him. He at least halfway looked scared, you know, like this is going to be a worldwide reset, you know, financially speaking. So, you know, everybody was like, what should we do? And I think that's, and at least at the time, it looked like in the future there was going to be a reckoning in terms of, you know, financial Armageddon. And I think that's why a lot of these tech support workers were laid off. You know, in hindsight, it turned out just a little bit different, but everybody was scared to death at the time. So the biggest problem that lingers to this day is transportation. And I think there's so many different factors that went into that. But one of the weirdest and most major things I'm hearing about is the dock situation. So, and this is due to many factors. A lot of it is just there's not any workers. So let's say you're a manufacturer and you order stuff from China, and you're lucky enough that they can make it, and you're lucky enough that they can ship it, and it ships all the way across the ocean, and it gets close to the docks, and there's nobody to unload it. And that's exactly what happened to a local speaker manufacturer. I just talked to one of the guys. I mean, they've been waiting on an order of magnets since like November, December. And the problem is that they were here close to the docks in November, December. Those things spent over 6 months on the water. These were made, these were shipped, at least on the boat. When they got here, nobody could unload it. They had to circle around, they had to park, they had to do everything else. And that happens more than you think. I mean, we saw it a lot with receivers. It's happened with amplifiers. I've seen stuff, and I thought 3 weeks was bad. I've seen stuff get tied up at the docks for 3 weeks and just sit there in the docks. But at this point, sometimes they can't even get to the docks. Everything is so clogged. There's just not enough workers. And I'll probably hit on more on this in a minute. Now that production is ramping up, one of the things that we're seeing that's kind of tying into the docks is now there's a shipping container shortage. So basically what happens is that when you order from a foreign manufacturer, you basically rent a shipping container. You don't have your own. Typically, you're going to pay about $2,000, and this is during normal times. If you get a shipping container full of stuff, the container itself is about $2,000, and I guess that includes handling and everything else. Well, that just started escalating. They turned to $5,000, then it's $7,000, and then there was reports of $13,000 from weird overseas situations that didn't really apply to us. Then $13,000 was the norm. At this point, I've heard of some manufacturers actually having to spend $25,000 on a shipping container that used to cost $2,000. And guess who gets to pay for that? You do. And so everybody's got to pass that cost on somehow. And I don't know when or if we'll ever recover from that. So basically, we're about to see a huge price increase for some of this stuff. By the time it recovers, it's going to be at least a couple of years. The prices ain't going to come back down at that point. It's just not. So the price increases that you're about to see, that some of them started in February. Some manufacturers have basically held on as long as they could. Some of them I'm surprised that I haven't heard a peep out of them, but as a whole, things are going up, a good 10%, 15%, something like that. Just industry as a whole, and this goes way beyond AV, and this is pretty much everything. We're in the middle of hyperinflation, and some people, I guess you gotta have some really good crack rock to think that inflation is only 2.5, no more than 3%, like some of the government reports. Things are just absolutely going through the roof, and I can't imagine that in middle class people as a whole is not going to be suffering for decades after this. It's just absolutely insane. So the other thing, and I don't know too much about this, the other thing that was a big concern with shipping, at least halfway recently, was the whole Evergreen wreck. I guess it was it the Panama Canal, Suez Canal? I don't know the difference. So I tried to do some digging on that. That really only affected Europe. From an AV perspective, of course, we're getting some backlash and some, ripples that are from that, but from a direct thing where, there was immediate major delays, I think it's Europe that actually got hurt the worst. I was told that shipments to the US really wasn't affected. I can't prove that. I don't know much about that situation. You probably know more than me. So the other thing that we're dealing with is a chip shortage. Now, what exactly that entails? Well, there's actually several things, unfortunately. So the first situation is that for whatever reason, I'm a conspiracy theory. I just think they're fun. They're a conspiracy theory nut. I just think they're fun, if nothing else. So half of me thinks that some of this was intentional. How do you have 3 major fires in chip manufacturers in, 18 months? That's absolutely insane. So that's what comes to people's mind when they think of the shortage. But the other thing, there's extenuating circumstances. The other thing is that supposedly like 90% of the world's semiconductors actually comes from Taiwan. Well, Taiwan is in the middle of the most major drought in 56 years. They have a reservoir that's used for cooling these plants, and at least by April, I don't know if this has changed recently, at least by April, that reservoir was down to 7% of the capacity. So I was under the understanding that basically, they were having to watch what they made. They couldn't really run at 100% because there wasn't enough water to cool the plants. So typically Taiwan is a very wet country. I've heard that there's tsunamis and I don't know what else, but supposedly it's very wet, and that just didn't happen this year for some reason, which I guess is affecting semiconductors, which is affecting all kinds of stuff, including the, receivers that are going in your living room. And what doesn't help with that is that, well, first of all, the government. So basically there's sanctions or threats of sanctions going on, and basically there was direct threats that we're just going to make our own. Actually, Biden just came out, and what did he propose? Something like $50 billion to invest in U.S. Semiconductor manufacturing. But there was also, threats of tariffs or whatever you call them in that situation. Well, Chinese companies, understandably, kind of freaked out, and they just started hoarding everything. So, it would be bad enough in the first place, but these Chinese companies are just ordering all they can. They're just stockpiling this stuff because they think they're going to get cut off. And I don't know that full extent. I just know between the fires and the water and the hoarding, it's a mess over there. So of course that leads to a shortage, which means there's less stuff to sell. But there's also what we've been seeing. I won't name any particular product, but what we've been seeing in the background is this huge scrambling of AV companies to re-engineer some of their stuff. So basically, if you've got a product that has a chip in it and all of a sudden that chip doesn't exist anymore, well, this other chip will probably work, but you're going to have to re-engineer the thing, and it's not just plug and play. So we experienced a couple of situations where it's like, look, if you don't buy this stuff right now, you may not see it for 6-8 months. So of course everybody freaks out and buys all they can, and that just makes the shortage worse. And we'll get to the stockpiling here in a minute. But yeah, that the re-engineering thing was significant from what I could tell. Oh, and yeah, so basically it's not just the chips themselves, so that China is supposedly hoarding. Supposedly it's actually the machines that make the chips. And so and from what I can tell, most of it is due to the threats of the technology ban. I think, who is that company that had ties to the cell phone? Huawei, or it starts with an H. Some of that came directly from that situation, I guess, with Trump. I don't know much about it. So yeah, speaking of tariffs and threats of tariffs, I mean, of course, their wood situation is awful. Part of the problem that is not helping with the wood is basically tariffs from Canadian lumber. So last I checked, the tariffs were actually going, like, doubling to like 18%, and I think that came directly from Biden. I would have to read up more about that. So anyways, at this point, there is a raw material shortage on pretty much everything. And most everybody's familiar with wood. Basically, this started back last spring. Everybody wants to blame something, blame the tariffs, blame manufacturing, blame furloughed lumberjacks out west. I've heard all kinds of stuff. But basically, it started during the quarantine, in my opinion. I mean, so basically, everybody was stuck at home. They couldn't go to work. And what are they going to do? They're going to finally finish that deck. So you could actually go to Lowe's, and it was just so many people. And they were selling stuff as soon as they could get it in. I mean, Lowe's became the hangout spot. Of course, there were, at least around here, there were one of the few places where, they wasn't counting people going in. They wasn't making you wear masks. So we saw entire families just hanging out for excessive long periods of time, and of course they're going to buy all kinds of stuff. So at least from my recollection, that was the first sign of some kind of lumber shortage, and that has continued all throughout everything. I mean, basically consumer demand just absolutely through the roof. I just never seen anything like it. But of course, the wood shortage, no matter what the reasons for that doesn't just affect 2x4s. I mean, that actually trickles down to MDF. You know, everybody knows plywood is through the roof. I mean, I saw it for $90 the other day, but you know, the MDF is basically the byproduct, and you know, it's basically a bunch of sawdust glued together. So, you know, that trickles down to even MDF. That makes speakers go up and everything else. Now, with the speaker stuff, it's not just the wood that's the problem. It's not just the drivers that are the problem. I mean, speakers have all kinds of different parts. If you don't have every one of those parts on hand, you can't build a speaker. So I've got a couple of speaker building buddies who are just running into that. I mean, you've got crossover components and amplifiers and wood and wiring and terminals and you know, insulation and veneer and glue, and I mean, there's all these things. I mean, you got to have all of it. So what I've heard from some people is that, well, they might have 80% of it, but the last 20% is a huge pain, which basically puts 100% of their product on hold. So it doesn't take much to just throw a total monkey wrench into the whole business. You know, of course, I talked about consumer demand, but the other part is that everybody is absolutely hoarding everything, myself included. I'm hoarding, I'm sorry. So basically, our inventory has went up almost 40% since all this started, and the reality is that if you don't do that, you got nothing to sell. So basically, we have to stockpile as much as we can and hope it lasts until the next shipment, which who knows when that will be. We just got a big shipment charged just yesterday, and I was like, what is this for? And we'll come to find out, I mean, it's speakers that we ordered back last August. I mean, it's 10 months ago or something. Just absolutely crazy. But yeah, I mean, we're, you know, if you don't stockpile, then for months we've been having to tell people, well, we just don't have it. Go to Amazon, which absolutely infuriates me that I have to do that. But it is what it is. So it's not just dealers, you know, manufacturers. I mentioned the Chinese companies. So basically, there's a lot of reinvesting going on. You know, if you make some money, it goes right back into the business. You try to grow as hard as you can, because it's either grow or die. That's the reality of it. And so you either stockpile or you've got nothing to sell. So luckily, most of the manufacturers have been really helpful throughout all this. There's a few practices that have raised some eyebrows and raised some hell, and you know, some people hate it more than others. There's a couple of things I don't particularly like, but most of the time they're pretty helpful. One of the things that hurts small dealers, and it hurt me for quite a while, and until I grew out of it. But basically, like I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of small AV dealers, basically they've got one card, and that's, you know, they're set up as the sole proprietor. I mean, like I said, I'm kind of past that. Most of them are sole proprietors. They've got one card that they do everything on. The problem is that when you start having a stockpile, like I've been talking about, pretty much instantly, you're talking about big charges that you're not used to, you know, going on that card. Well, the problem is that some of these manufacturers are using antiquated card systems, and what happens is that they'll be like, oh, you need several $1,000s worth of this. Okay, we got it. We'll charge your card. Whoops, we just sold it to somebody else accidentally. Sorry for your luck. They'll do a refund. Your credit's tied up for several days, and you know, you do that 2-3 times, and it can really put a hurting on you. And so my plea is that for the manufacturers that are still doing that, man, come on. it's an extra burden for absolutely no reason, no good reason. It helps nobody. So this is, I've seen and heard more of this type of stuff since, it's been a problem for years and years, but now that people are having to stockpile and get out of their comfort zone, it doesn't help that, sometimes they get double charged because, somebody screwed up and, charged you for 20 items when you really only had 19. That almost doubles what goes on your card and ties up your credit. I mean, it's just it's not cool. One concern that is kind of the elephant in the room that a lot of dealers are afraid of, that nobody talks about, is that they're afraid that there is about to be this mass migration of what has traditionally been dealer products being moved over to Internet Direct. Of course, you've got your Internet Direct companies, and you've got your companies that have been Internet Direct and have branched out and started selling to individual dealers. SVS comes to mind. They've been perfect throughout. I mean, just, you can't beat SVS in terms of how they've been handling all this. But what if you go the other way? What if you have traditionally been dealer only, and then you try to funnel it back to yourself and stick it on your own website if you're a manufacturer? And we've actually seen that. We've seen that happen in an accelerated manner. I mean, basically, I don't care so much because I got so much on my plate, it doesn't really affect me much. But some other dealers are, I won't be specific here, but their bread and butter is certain things, whether it be TVs or receivers or whatever. And when those manufacturers get stuff in and they tell the dealers that they don't have any for months and months, but it's always on their website, dealers start being like, come on, this is what we were afraid of. And, we're starting to see that on an accelerated rate, which is concerning to a lot of people, not necessarily me. What does affect me is multiple manufacturers have been more lax on enforcing the rules. And it's another one of those elephant in the rooms. We're not supposed to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is that not just industry-wide, pretty much any product that is worth anything, there's an understanding that there is certain prices that you can sell it at. Typically when there's a sale, the manufacturer will have a sale, but also all the dealers can have a sale all at the same time, and that keeps the jackasses, for lack of a better word, from just using their massive buying power and getting stuff at a discount and then turning around and selling it at wholesale publicly, which it irks me because that's how I got started. This is probably the 12th or 15th small business I've had. A lot of people think I just had a wild hair to be a AV dealer one day and it made it happen. That's not nearly the case. I've been studying and trying to figure out how stuff works for 20 years at this point. So one of the first things I did was back in 2001. I was big into Jeeps. I sold rock crawler and Jeep parts, and I would sell worn winches, Rubicon Express lift kits, signed up with multiple distributors that sold soft tops for Jeeps and all that good stuff. So what burned me is that there's actually, at least in that world, there's different tiers of you've basically got different buy-in levels. So tier one is the Mac Daddy accounts, at least with I think at the time, like with worn winches, you're expected a $100,000 initial order. That's a lot of winches. Okay, it's a lot. These things are 70, 80, 90 pounds, and it's a lot of those things just laying around. So most people couldn't do that. Second level is like $25,000. And back then, given the prices, you're still talking, I mean, at least 50 winches just laying around. That's a hard pill to swallow, especially when you're first starting out. Third tier is more or less going through the distributor. I mean, you're signed up as a dealer, but you get what they call jobber pricing, and that basically means you wait until you've got a job to do, and then you order the winch at a discount, and then you could sell it at retail, and everybody's happy. You don't have the huge buy-in. Your money's not tied up. The distributor gets paid, and the manufacturer gets paid. Everybody is happy. But what happens when you get a guy who has one of those Mac Daddy accounts, and they start selling on eBay or whatever at jobber pricing or less? Are you kidding? You can't eat with that situation going on. So basically the general public can buy stuff cheaper than you can. But that was 20 years ago, and I'm seeing that in a couple of situations. I've counted at least 4 times off the top of my head since we've started that's happened recently, that I've had a bunch of stuff in stock, and then all of a sudden I realized there's one of those guys with a lot of buying power who just likes to sell stuff at wholesale. I mean, are you kidding? We're not collectors. We buy stuff with the idea that we can flip it, and I guess I'm pointing this out because it's not just me that this stuff affects. I mean, there's a lot more dealers than me out there that are stuck with stuff that they basically have to sell at a loss just to. I don't even know what to say about it. I like car analogies. Okay, so I use car analogies all the time. One of the quotes that I like is actually from Bill Finsmars, who makes those. I think it's the Tuba subs. I think that's him at least. So basically, a lot of people ask, should I mix and match subs? Should I put a sealed and put a ported and horn in the same room, or should I put 15s for the low bass and 12s for the medium bass and 8s for the mid bass all in the same room? His answer is basically that's akin to taking your car and putting a snow tire on one wheel and a mud tire on one wheel and a racing slick on the other and an all-terrain tire on the other, and expecting great performance in all situations, when the reality is that you've got poor performance in all. So that made me chuckle. I started using it all the time. So this situation in particular, and forgive my car analogies, but imagine that you're a NASCAR driver. Okay, NASCAR has rules. They have a maximum displacement. I think it's 358 cubic inches. I'm not a NASCAR fan, but I think that's right. There's all kinds of different rules, and your job as a racer, as a racing team, is to study those rules, figure out which ones just can't be broken, figure out which ones can be fudged a little bit, but more than anything, you want to be right up to that line, but not go over it. That's your job, So imagine if you're a NASCAR racer and you spend all this time, R&D and money and everything else, and you show up for race day and you look over and a guy's got an engine that's 100 cubic inches more than what's in the rules. Like, what? What are you going to do? I mean, how, you can talk to the officials and be like, guys, what's going on? And what if the officials just, I don't know, man, is it really hurting you? Like, what's the problem? Like, that's what it's like from my perspective. So it's not really cool. I wish for whatever reason that these rules are not being enforced all of a sudden, that would reverse. I'm assuming that it's due to less manpower, but we're kind of past that stage at this point. Like I said, this is multiple companies. This has been an ongoing issue, but yeah, generally speaking, smaller dealers are seeing more of that, and we don't necessarily like it. One thing that manufacturers could be a jackass about, but they're not, is there's a lot more I hate to say great market, but technically it is gray market. It's almost black market, really. So gray market is basically you go to a dealer and you're like, hey guys, I'm gonna buy a bunch of this stuff at a discount, but I just, I need a good discount, but we're gonna buy a bunch of it. Okay, and the dealer's like, oh, okay, cool, here it is. And then you turn around and you flip it. So the idea is that, when people see stuff online or whatever, and there is a discounted price, you can't immediately tie that back to the dealer. So some people go as far as to scratching off the serial numbers and a whole bunch of other shenanigans. So that's kind of what's going on, but not really. I mean, basically, what's happening is that dealers are running out of stuff, and they're basically approaching other dealers and be like, look bro, I'm out of this TV, I'm out of this Marantz, I'm out of this speaker, can you help me out? So other dealers like, sure, I'll sell it to you at this. They're gonna make a little bit, and then basically the second dealer who bought it is going to turn around and sell it to their customer. So basically that's being an unauthorized distributor at that point, which manufacturers could be a meanie head about, but they're just kind of overlooking it, which if they didn't, they'd be hurting a heck of a lot of small dealers. So that is one good thing. I've seen it happen occasionally. It's luckily we've got enough stockpiled that it doesn't matter much, but I'm not gonna lie, we have been approached multiple times. We just have to be careful about who it's with and make sure it's a friend and all that good stuff. I told you all the crap that's happening. So what's the end result of this? Well, the biggest thing is the absolutely major back orders from hell. I told you about those speakers we've been waiting on since last August, 10 months. I told you about those magnets that have been circling around in the ocean for the past 6 months. But it's way beyond that. I mean, distributors, I've seen orders for hundreds of thousands of dollars for TVs being entered. No clue when it will ever come in. Months, if not ever. Sometimes the back orders are so long, manufacturers are just like, you know what? We changed our mind. We're going to cancel your order, and we're going to, you're free to start all over again, but it's going to be at this new price. I won't mention names, but that did happen. I think it happened twice, to be honest, 2 different manufacturers. So that's a surprise, because it's, if we promise something to customers, it's hard to go back to a customer and be like, you know what, the manufacturer changed their mind. They really want this amount, so we're going to charge you an extra $200. How's that? That's not going to fly. We get to absorb all that, so that kind of sucks. We've had a 6-month wait for seats, just for them to be damaged when they come in, which puts us in a weird position because there's nothing to replace them with. So if you wait for 6 months for something and it's finally there and it's got a little scratch or at least mild damage, you can't just say, oh, we'll swap that. We don't have anything. The manufacturer doesn't have anything. You might wait another 6 months. I mean, they're already super mad about that point. So again, it puts us in a really awkward situation. Biggest thing I don't like is having to over order. Like I said, it's next to impossible to know when this stuff is going to come in. All we can do is order all we can. Basically figure out what you think you might use and, get about 50% more than that, and which puts you way out of your comfort zone. The problem is that stuff comes in randomly. It would take a team of buyers to figure out when exactly all this stuff is going to come in, and even they couldn't figure it all out. It's just knowing the future, knowing the delays and everything else is impossible. So we're basically having to over order. The problem is that what if all this stuff comes in on the same day? It really increases the pucker factor, and it just scares the crap out of us, to be honest. But that goes well beyond just AV. You know, there's a local bicycle dealer who has the same problem. He's having to order stuff for year 2023 at this point, and if they're early, they're early. But you know, if all of a sudden all this stuff ships early, and he decides, well, I'm overextending myself, well, tough luck. You know, you get to pay a penalty for canceling what you ordered, even though that there's probably dozens, if not hundreds, of other dealers ready to take those bicycles, which is absolute bullcrap. So basically, just adding more to the end result, we've seen you know, dealers fighting over stuff. I mean, as soon as we get word that something's in stock, you know, we've got multiple dealers trying to get it. We've got new salespeople and distributors selling stuff out from underneath us, which, you know, honest mistakes is fine and forgivable, but it's just the chaos just makes it hard. So I'm just going to go through some of the rest of this real quick. Basically, we've got dealers that are fighting each other over products. We've got salespeople and distributors that are basically selling stuff out from underneath us. You know, we can't trust inventory numbers or ship date times from manufacturers. Very significant price increases are underway, have been since February. Hyperinflation specifically for this industry that we're never going to recover from. Everybody knows better. Biggest issue from a very, very small dealer standpoint, or at least if I was still one, is that, I mean, there's nothing available at distributors at all. So, I mean, completely out of amps, almost completely out of TVs. You know, receivers, I mean, multiple receiver companies are just bare. It's just insane. One thing I don't particularly like is customers are having a balance between dealers. So basically, oh, I'll buy this 5 stuff from you, but you don't have the rest of the stuff, so I'll try to get a couple things from here, a couple things from there. They're having to piece stuff together. You know, there's manufacturers that we signed up with specifically for the fact that we don't like to send people elsewhere. We like to be a one-stop shop. You know, so it's a weird deal when people are bouncing all over the internet trying to piece stuff together. We've had freight shipments go up $250 just for one single shipment in a 24-hour period. I mean, basically, we get a quote, get back to the guy, and he gives us go-ahead the next day. So we go to ship it, $250 more. That's not cool. Gas prices and pretty much everything else is basically causing shipping prices to go up. Yeah, it's not just that, it goes way beyond shipping. Basically, that's squeezing profits. Planning, you know, I hired on Mark to help with buying, you know, and just I can't be selling stuff balls to the wall, but also plan ahead of time. It's just hard for me to do both. So Mark does a lot of the planning for me, but really, realistically speaking, it's all just a big guessing game at this point. You don't know when stuff's going to show up. You don't know when it's going to show up. You don't know anything. So it's all your planning. I mean, you can still guess, but in terms of it being an exact science, like it has mostly historically, that's gone. But yeah, the small dealers is what I'm concerned with. Like if you're a company that does mostly TV hangers and you're used to just making $100 on the TV and, you know, some labor charges. I mean, if there's nothing to sell, like, and distributors have nothing, I just honestly, I don't know how you're going to eat. So that's mostly it from my perspective. But like I said, this goes well beyond just AV gear. You know, I talked to a bicycle dealership recently. where some of this information came from. Basically, I have multiple friends that are in the food and alcohol business. You know, there's major delays on certain alcohols, certain foods that are coming in. Basically, they're running into a situation where they're forced to, accept a different product from a different company, or else they have to forfeit the entire shipment. Shortage on everything, including, bottling, food packaging. The newest thing I heard of is that there's actually a truck driver shortage. Apparently a bunch of them were furloughed at first, and then they basically just got different jobs, and just like the warehouse people or the docks people, and there's not enough people to actually drive the trucks. So it goes well beyond me. Hopefully this is just an insight to some of the customers who have been hurt and miffed and felt neglected for multiple reasons. Not just me, but I hear almost every day that manufacturers aren't being very fast in getting back to them, or just whatever. There's just so many forces at play, I don't even know where to start. So anyways, unless I can think something else and add to it after a couple of hours, that's enough rambling for one day. So hope you enjoy it. It's welcome to my world. So anyways, this is Cory signing off. Talk to you later. Bye.